Hello, welcome to the ADCC 24-hour all-nighter. My name is Mike Giesser. I run a business called Giesser, communication design and strategy, and I'm going to very quickly talk through a bunch of projects, and then later I'm going to speak to Claire Dawson, have a bit of a chatty wet for about 30 minutes, and field some questions. So look, there's a lot in this document, so I'm gonna start screen sharing and get cracking right away. And I'm gonna probably just run through things pretty quickly because time is of the essence. All right, here we go. So in terms of what I'm gonna talk through is I'm gonna give you a bit of an introduction and talk about the practice, and then kind of run through some selected work. So I've pulled out some projects that have been very, I guess, defining for me and the sort of studio, basically organized into the main categories of work the sectors that I work in, just architecture and design, arts and culture, hospitality. And then I'm gonna run through just like less case studies and more like just a few bits and bobs in the miscellaneous section. So Giesser is a communication design studio based in Melbourne, focused primarily on brand identity. We work mostly with small to medium-sized creative businesses, organizations, and institutions. And really the main thing that I do with them is kind of really help them better understand who they are as a brand. And once we kind of know who they are, then we kind of find the best ways to communicate, all this stuff to their desired audiences. So in terms of the practice, I will keep probably saying we throughout the whole thing, but really it's a one-man band. It's mostly just me. That said, I do work with a whole variety of really talented people. I work with a couple different web programmers, and I work with a lot of different art directors, a lot of different photographers, copywriters, stylists, and then occasionally when I do need some freelance support, I will bring in other designers. So as I said, the work is primarily focused on creating brand identity, but to me that just means that we kind of do it all. So everything from naming to print and web design to exhibition design to signage and publications. Variety is the spice of life. So in terms of my process, it's probably very similar to a lot of other creative studios and practices out there. It starts with the discovery phase. That's really just questions and answers. The client does a lot of the talking, but together we sort of uncover the kind of the mandatories about their business. And then from there, after we kind of have a chat, I record everything, and then I kind of go away and I do a lot of distillation and kind of take the things that they've said and kind of put it all together into this brand DNA document. It's like the name suggests, it really is creating a blueprint, a fingerprint, a signature for that brand. If we want to liken them to people, to humans. And from there, once that sort of DNA is all sort of done and dusted and signed off, then I take that and move into the create stage, which is the concept development stage. So that's where we kind of take all that thinking and the learnings and turn it into the cool visual stuff. And once that is done, then we move into breaking all those little things in an identity, and we sort of separate them into their own little individual projects, like the website or like the stationery or a book or whatever we're doing. So that's what that make stage is. It's about evolving the thinking from the create stage and making all those ideas tangible outputs. Now, jumping right into the selected work, because perhaps we'll be able to talk a little bit more about my practice and my approach later. So architecture and design, it's probably one of the main areas that I work in historically, have worked in, and it's like, at least in terms of 2020, it's about 95% of the work that I'm doing is in the space. The first project I'm going to show is from 2017. And it's for practice, an architecture practice named Archer. So here's a look at three of the four directors, strapping young lads from Tasmania. So their practice is probably about, I think, 10 to 15 people now at the moment. So they do a lot of really beautiful, refined, but still quite raw. I think the words that they sort of described themselves as initially when we first met was a bush architecture. And you can also sort of talk about it as regional architecture. But, you know, beautiful, lots of timber, but still highly refined. Speaking of highly refined, what the studio also does is, you know, sort of self-initiated product development. So they've created, I think, from memory, 3 different pendant lights, similar to the one on this page, and another sort of series of ceramic basins, all very beautiful. So this pendant here is called the Capitol. And then here's another one in Situation. This is the High Line. They're both very similar. This one is just a little bit more discreet. The sort of intent when they designed it was that it would just disappear in any environment that it was placed in. So it makes it very difficult to photograph, actually. So in terms of the objectives for this one, it was really about developing a cohesive identity that was flexible enough to allow for growth and change over time. I mean, every sort of business changes quite a bit in sort of a 2 to 5 year span. So we want the identity to still be able to stand up, but allow for things to change, you know, behind it and within the frameworks. Really wanted to position these guys as really an easygoing, holistic studio that creates intelligent experiences that contribute to a better quality of life. I mean, that's what a lot of architects and interior designers are fundamentally trying to do. There's a bit of an issue around pronunciation and the name, which I'll kind of get into in a second. Bring both the product design side and the architectural practice side together under one identity. Previously, they were sort of 2 different things. And really wanting to make sure that the identity has enough scope to be humble, down to earth, as well as like really refined and high end. So relating to those pictures that we just saw on the previous slides, you know, there's the kind of the rough and the rugged and the raw with the really highly polished, really refined, high end product design. So the brand idea that we came up with this one was the idea of pioneering design. So if you separate those 2 words and you just start to visualize, you know, what does pioneering look like? Oh, here it is. And then contrasting that with design, you know, so before you've got these really the wild, the rugged, the unknown areas. And now here's the really beautiful, slick, polished, high-end kind of vibe. So in terms of what we wanted to do for the brand identity was find the sort of middle ground and the sort of these elements that had that contrast, so very beautiful and considered, but really honest and natural, contrasting between the everyday and the elevated. The paperclip, oh, the humble paperclip, it came up in one of the discovery sessions in the beginning and became a really big component of the actual rollout of the identity. So this is the logo. So yes, the pronunciation is meant to be Archer, but they couldn't get web domains. They couldn't actually register the business. Someone else had it. So that was their way of like kind of getting something similar accomplished. But then it led to a lot of question around, well, how do we actually pronounce your name? Are you Archier, Archier, Archier? So what I did with the logo was just sort of downplay, you know, the I. So eventually it kind of essentially just drops down to the bottom of the page. So you almost don't really see it, but it is technically still there. So one of the big things was this sort of idea of economy with the identity. Well, I guess it is with most people, but could we create something that had all these sort of dual purposes? So I looked at just creating this sort of A4 heavy boxboard piece of material that could be used as, you know, a cover for proposals or tender documents or pitches or even just notebooks. Then in the middle, you know, that was then used as a backing board where their product brochures for the different lights and the ceramic basin, just by taking the paper clip could just be used to hold everything together. And then even something with like a with complements sort of slip, it could be just guillotined in half, and they could have these A5 pieces of paper that they write a little thank you note on, and just use that paper clip again, pop it in an envelope, mail it over. And then a look at some of those pieces kind of coming together. I always like this image. I mean, it speaks volumes about the, summarizes the whole identity very well on one slide. So you've got the sort of this tender document in the background, and then you've got sort of a product brochure on top, and then a business card, all just held together by our friend, the paperclip. And then a look at the mobile version of the website sitting on top there. So yeah, all very much about contrast, a bit of that sort of the elements of the raw with the really highly refined design. And that's a look at the product brochure. So it just opened up. I think these were A4 landscape folded down to A5, and then there were two sheets that were just folded. They weren't bound to house all the product images and information. And we did that for each one of the products. And then the website, very straightforward, a lot of space. So again, like I always kind of think luxury, high end, it's really about space. Space is like the one thing that none of us actually have. So it's a very kind of precious commodity in a lot of ways. And then balancing that with this really kind of almost blokey, tone of voice, saying that we architecture things, lol. And then a few more pages from the website. A big part of a lot of the work that I do are in these sort of templates. So with most architectural or interior design practices, they have a whole heap of schedules and different types of presentations, fee proposals, media releases. They're the backbone and the workhorses of a lot of the identities that I do, is all these InDesign templates, and a lot of the stuff I then get a third party to translate into Word and Excel where relevant. And this is sort of a look at what from the first concept presentation. I always try to present things on these sort of family pages to put everything together to see how everything works as a cohesive identity. So, kind of cool, like not a lot changed from this very first presentation in terms of the overall approach and structure. We really just, changed the typeface. So the second project we're going to look at is another architectural identity for a practice named Blight, Blight, and Blight, done in 2018. So Blight, Blight, and Blight is not a three-man studio. It is just one man named Richard, but Richard is a pretty interesting fellow, kind of larger than life personality. So when he had some questions around should they keep the name, I was kind of like, yeah, it's kind of weird. It's kind of kooky. It's really different than anyone else. So yeah, I think you should keep it. This image here, I think, is really indicative of a lot of Richard's work. It's pretty out there. It's pretty wild. It's not the prettiest thing you're going to see, but this is called the Birdhouse, and it was for basically a retired couple that just bird watching was their jam. So everything was sort of created around this, their activity of bird watching. So the objectives here were kind of similar as Archer, but a little bit different. And I guess it's about positioning. That's why we do the strategy, is to figure out what the appropriate positioning is going to be for each one of these projects. And then that kind of really drives a lot of our sort of aesthetic responses and conceptual responses. So with Richard, it was really about positioning him and his business as kind of a new breed of practice. And it was all about providing unconventional solutions to unconventional people with unconventional problems. So similar, then the identity really needed to follow in suit as well. It had to be unique and it had to feel unconventional as well, but still have a professionalism to it and make sure that it feels that it belongs in the architectural world. Of course, we don't want to freak too many people out. So we wanted to make sure that it didn't alienate any of the more conservative audiences. And we had to ensure that Richard's personality comes through. That's a big part of what I do, and I imagine what I'd hope, you know, most sort of communication and graphic designers are doing, is making sure that the personality of that brand and the people behind that brand shines through. And then give something to Richard that he was really proud of and excited about and couldn't, you know, wait to get out in the world. So in terms of the brand idea, where everything sort of started from and stemmed from was just this word "un." And it was very much about Richard sort of being a bit of an outsider, and not really fitting into the mold of the traditional kind of the idea of the architect, which is by no means a bad thing. So then we kind of added on to it and said, well, maybe what you do is you're an architect who does on architecture. So, you know, then that starts to become more than just an idea. It's almost a provocation that's sort of denouncing the status quo. You know, it really sort of clearly states, you know, that Richard is not a part of this sort of derivative cookie cutter ego-led fashion parade that, you know, a lot of architecture tends to be. Instead, his output is more centered around something that's more significant than architecture that simply photographs well. There's a lot of that. It positions Blight as a proud outsider, as I said, and places the practice in somewhat of a new category, at least, you know, within sort of the Melbourne and Australian landscape. And then these were just a lot of these sort of unwords that I think we thought were quite interesting. There's this kind of duality where a lot of them are quite, you know, negative in terms of their connotation, but there are also some that are quite positive. So it's sort of an interesting thing that happens with this prefix. And then moving through to the actual logo and word mark, it was just big and kind of chunky and a little bit ugly. And then creating sort of more responsive and adaptable versions for different contexts. And then I guess where we kind of departed, but from the ideas relating to un, at least literally, was I came up with this idea of these blight rhymes. So just all these little statements that rhymed with blight, blight, and blight. And it was actually quite tricky. I mean, there's not, you know, thousands of words that rhyme with blight, but they had to kind of have the same kind of cadence and rhythm, or at least similar to when you say blight, blight, and blight. And what I also wanted them to do was to speak to Richard's personality, and speak a little bit about his capability as an architect, and then just have some random ones in there for good measure. And then how that kind of was then translated to things like the website. This is still, you know, how the website looks today. You have this sort of series of the little rhymes just cycling through. And then moving through, some additional pages from the website, but fairly straightforward. Nothing too crazy. Business cards, really simple, but just beautiful, letterpress printed. It's kind of the nice thing about only having like 1 or 2 staff members is, you know, things like letterpress are actually feasible. And then all that even carried through to his sort of more admin templates. And I was able to, for the most part, kind of find rhymes that related to, you know, the context. So the meeting minutes, those rhymes are all relating to, you know, listening and writing and taking down notes from a meeting. And even the invoice was pretty playful, suggesting that, you know, yeah, sure, the fees are this or the fees are that, but they're quite all right, but they are due in a fortnight. And then here was the rejected concept that didn't get over the line, but it was more about just playing up the ridiculousness of the name, and just, you know, kind of occupying the entire space or side of something with blight, 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 blight. Moving on to the next one. Let me just have a little bit of water first. It's good. It's good. So the next project is for something called New Volumes, and that was done in 2018. Oops. Let's see, we're going. All right, so we got to speed it up. So New Volumes was a brand created by Artadomus, which is Australia's sort of leading supplier of architectural stones, so marbles and granites and things like that, and products that are related. This is the first collection from New Volumes. So all these products are made entirely out of a material called Elba. And Elba is very similar to marble, but it's actually a dolomite. So it's a lot more durable, it's a lot harder. This is a look at, a few of the designers from the first collection. Yep, I know what you're thinking. And then the second guy in, that's Thomas, and Thomas is the creative director of the whole project. This is one of the lamps designed by Ross Gardam. Beautiful, beautiful lamp, heavy, huge. And I didn't get to go on the photo shoot, but there was at the beginning this incredible photo shoot in Greece at the actual quarry where the Elba comes from. And then we made this little video at the launch. Oops, it's not playing. A little bit slow, dramatic. So yeah, so it had a drone down there. So I took some drone footage and got to show the guys actually working at the quarry, kind of doing their thing. Pretty amazing. Boom. Good thing no one was there. Oh, and these goats. I don't know who hired the goats, but God bless them. The idea for this behind this brand was this one of a story yet to be written. And it was kind of this way of acknowledging that we really didn't know what was going to come next. Collection 1, we sort of knew what we were doing, but the whole idea is that this continues on into infinity, and they keep doing new collections. We didn't even have a name at that point when we sort of started working on it. So we just started thinking about stories and trying to figure out what are the most, there's sort of these kind of through lines in stories that will be there no matter what the materiality or what the, stone or glass or terracotta or whatever it is. So we kind of figured, well, we're always going to have these stories to tell. So maybe there is really something in, the idea of storytelling. And that's where the name New Volumes actually kind of came from. I think originally I put forward the idea of volume, and that, it'd just be volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. But of course we couldn't trademark volume, so we added new to it. And there we go, boom, tick. So there's the logo, bit of that website, the goat again, pay them $5 every time people log on. Pretty straightforward stuff. And then this was the main brand mark, again, a bit of a reference to, how kind of slabs of stone are arranged, even though we said we didn't want it to be too particular, but it also is just the N and the V, if that wasn't obvious. And then we got to do this publication, which was incredible. I floated the idea and said, look, this is a significant thing that we're doing. We're talking about, making this big splash, and it's all about, these volumes and stories. We should be doing a book. We shouldn't be doing brochures. And surprisingly, they said, yeah, okay. And then, of course, there were all these sort of digital spec sheets, technical information sheets on every product. And then the identities continued to sort of expand and roll out and do new things when required. So this was from the Melbourne Design Week last year, an exhibition that they put on in a little gallery space. And then here's a look at the family page from the initial concept presentation. So again, I'm quite pleased that that one stayed quite true to its initial intent. Flax Studio, this was a big one for me last year. Here's a look at the team. I've been working with these guys, not all of them, mostly just Dave and Mark, since 2015 when I did the original Identity. These guys do some incredible stuff. They're sort of the variety and depth in their repertoire is inspiring. So this is the original Identity that I did in 2015, and it was all heavily branded, just branded the shit out of it. Everything was blue and pink. Everything really had a reference to Dave's personal tone of voice and how Dave talks, which is kind of There's a lot of bad jokes. There's a lot of camp humor. So it was really about channeling Dave and making sure that everyone got a really good impression of Dave before they had even met him. So more of these flackisms, as we used to call it. But I guess ultimately what ended up happening is that all that stuff just became, it got in the way of the actual work. So, you know, at the time, when there wasn't a lot of projects in the portfolio, we kind of needed to do something so big. But over time, you know, and sort of lead, you know, the identity was something that really led the brand. But over time, like their work is just so incredibly good and getting better and better. It was pulling the caliber of the work down. So now what we've kind of done in with the rebrand last year is sort of do almost the exact opposite. So a completely recessive branding, to the point where in the original presentation, there wasn't even a logo presented. I was trying to kind of get that over the line, but didn't quite manage it. But where the work leads everything. It's just all about the work. And the main sort of brand idea that framed all of that was this idea of interior as art and art as interior. One of the key elements to the rebrand was this custom typeface that I was lucky enough to get the go-ahead on commissioning. So it's pretty cool. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a pretty classic typeface, but a majority of the characters have 2 to 3 different alternate glyphs. So through the use of contextual alternates is what you see here, as you're sort of typing in InDesign, and even in actually in Microsoft Word, it's actually possible. The letters change, so it kind of pulls different characters at random. So you end up with, you know, a huge mix of the kind of traditional classic versions of each glyph, and then the kind of the wacky tricked out version of it as well, all living together. So that was sort of completed in a display weight, regular weight, and a mono. So as I said, I couldn't completely get the whole identity over the line without a logo. There were some problems, production problems with the business cards due to the fineness of the serifs and the font. So to kind of achieve the production effect that we wanted, we essentially had to kind of give up the design direction. But still, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful business card. The website was pretty, was sort of something I had this idea about initially, and got a part and parcel with that idea of interior as art, taking cues from, you know, private art galleries, where there's the idea of you can't just rock up, you've got to book an appointment. So I thought, wouldn't it be funny if we actually had that on the website, where that's the first thing you see when you get there, that, you know, the website is viewed by appointment only, make a booking. And then when you click on make a booking, or when you hover over it, just says lol, just kidding. But I mean, it was more than just a joke. I think I've spoken with these guys and other clients over the last couple of years as things like websites, well, as social media has gotten more popular, and, you know, you almost have to question the validity of having a website, especially when you're on the kind of higher end of things. It's all referral based. All new business is referral based. So there's no one who's got a couple $1 million to spend sitting there Googling interior designer Melbourne and then, you know, giving them a ring. I mean, there might be people doing that, but they're going to be a waste of time. And that's just kind of the reality of, you know, the context of this world. So anyways, that was a bit of a lull. And then, but for the rest of it, it was, you know, just a really nice, straightforward website where the work is very, very front and center. But again, you know, I did manage to sort of get no logo across the board here. And again, why would you? It's a website. You've just typed in the URL. You know where you are. You know, so you really don't need to have websites in this level. But yeah, big, bold, beautiful images of the work. And one of the really cool sections, I think, is this whole artists and makers section. So it's massive. And basically, they're bigging up all the kind of the artists and the makers, the people that they commission and work with a lot, and sort of kind of giving them a lot of attention front and center on their website. So you can easily spend, you know, an hour just digging through all these amazing artists, you know, on their website. And then of course, all websites need to work on phones these days. Another big component to the identity, and it's always kind of been there, but they've been repurposed in this refresh, are these staged with comps cards. So they're A5 cards that basically kind of signify the completion of a stage. So they get mailed out to the client at the end, and then there's a personal note written down there. And then so that, yeah, it kind of works in the sort of the main 7 stages that, you know, the studio's process works. And then what they get at the beginning before they get these cards is this really big, I can't remember exactly how big it is, and I don't have a copy of it here, but these project books where they can store these, you know, these cards in at the end of each stage. They kind of put it in there, and then the work from that stage is sitting in the folder, tucked into these little pockets in front of it. So this was kind of based off an idea that I had when I was visiting my parents in Canada last year, and we were looking at my baby book. So it kind of has that sort of scrapbook sort of vibe to it, but really high end. Everything's all custom. These things cost a bomb, but they're a great thing to give to the client. And frankly, they're a good sales tool for FLAC Studio as well, because when, you know, the people whose house has just been redone have their friends over, you know, they're going to show them this book, and it's, you know, again, it's a great referral for the work that FLAC does. And then at the end, when all the project has been documented, this little book gets produced and just sort of sits in a sleeve at the back. And then there's just space for other random bits in the back as well, news clippings, what have you. And yeah, there are heaps of templates with this one as well, as with all the projects. Also some, you know, adaptations for things like Instagram. And I just wanted everything to kind of move this time around. So everything's kind of animated for all those sort of Instagram stories and posts. And then here's a look at, you know, the family from the first concept presentation. Once again, quite similar to where we landed. Arts and culture. So Arts House is someone that I worked with from 2015 to 2018. They are predominantly, the works that they put on are in the performance sort of spectrum, and, you know, not always the most, let's just say, you know, contemporary performances and contemporary dance are, you know, often at that very pointy end of the contemporary art spectrum, not for everyone. A big part of, you know, that project was at the start of the year, well, before the start of the year, I'd sort of sit together with the curator, and we would kind of go through what the thematics were, you know, in the shows happening, you know, in season 1 and season 2, and then I would work with different image makers and art directors to come up with basically seasonal campaign imagery for those years. And then kind of the main thing I always wanted to have was at least a strong tie between 1 and 2. And, you know, previously they hadn't really had that approach, but I think, I don't know, it just ends things nicely. But it's a challenge when the thematics change quite differently between seasons. So this one here was really a lot of the content in the works from season 1 was very much about, you know, being an outsider looking in. And then season 2 was more about environmental issues. So I just wanted to have this idea where you couldn't quite tell, obviously, what was going on, you know, from behind. But then when season 2 was launched, you could actually see that she was essentially drowning under this water. And this is from the last one that I did in 2018. And a lot of the works in the first, at least in the first half, were all very participatory works where people would come in, they'd, you know, be given all these objects, things to break and make and kind of put together themselves. So I kind of came up with the strap line of it's what, you know, Arts House season 1, it's what you make of it, which kind of led to this whole idea of, I worked with Marcia Golmack, this image maker, this art director, stylist, to create these hacks, these kind of useless products at the end of the day. And then that sort of, rolled out into that season 1 program, posters. I mean, I essentially kind of did everything for Arts House. I was sort of like their in-house designer, but I wasn't actually their in-house designer. And in truth, that's kind of why the relationship sort of ended. I just couldn't manage the workload with them on top of all my other clients, which is a shame because it was a lot of great work. Next wave. So this was something from last year, 2019. Look at them. That's a happy bunch of next wavers, having a lot of fun. What a great place to work. And this page here is just kind of a snapshot of a lot of the different artworks that they put on. So they're just an institution that helps promote the sort of young generation, the up and coming sort of world of artists here in Australia. All the people that work with Next Wave are pretty much practicing artists themselves. So they kind of get it. They know what the struggles are like out there. So Next Wave is for artists, is by artists. It's a festival that happens every 2 years, but it's more than a festival. So essentially they have programming and initiatives all year long. They work with other sort of universities and whatnot. They almost act as a consultancy when a university might want to put on something and they need some help understanding what's cool, or what's relevant, or what's the appropriate thing to do. So yeah, they're kind of open for business all year long. The brand idea for this one came from their vision statement, which was that Next Wave wants to sort of see a world reshaped by artists. What does that look like? Maybe it's not this wacky. Maybe it's much more closer to what we see now, but maybe there's more equality and more fairness and less capitalist influences. Hard to say. So I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to keep blowing through this. Fundamentally, though, what they really wanted was nothing like too sleek or too sexy or too timeless. They wanted something that was really responsive, that was always kind of adaptive and changing. And there was like a couple words in sort of the part of the discussions we had in the beginning. And the CEO had sort of said, maybe like a multi-dimensional egg that could be broken apart and reshaped back together depending on whatever the certain needs or the context was. So that really sort of, it didn't come initially, but it took a little while, but eventually we kind of got there. And that's sort of what's guided the whole sort of response, is this sort of system that's constantly changing and moving. There's kind of there's defined parameters and there's a defined number of components, but they can be recomposed in all these different expressions and combined with all these wacky color palettes. And this is also really indicative of a lot of work that I'm doing at the moment. Like there's nothing printed in this identity. Everything is digital. And that's, obviously things have been going this way for quite a while, but, I'm really seeing more and more projects that everything is just sort of digital. The website was kind of fun. There's lots of little fun elements to it. There's a little chat bot you can go on, have a chat with. There's all these accessibility features. So you can kind of strip away all the graphics. Everything's huge. You can read the text from the other side of the room. So yeah, it's a pretty cool website. Change the colors. You have this sort of thing for people with low vision. Yeah, it was a good one. A couple things that didn't make it through to the final was the client had these ideas around, in the brief, they'd asked, could the website be influenced by the weather, which I thought was actually just a brilliant idea. So we started looking into, yeah, I mean, could you, if it was raining in Melbourne and you kind of logged on and, could there just be this sort of looping video of the kind of rain happening, just on these landing pages when you first got to the website. And then with the chat, the little live chat thing, I guess I never envisioned that thing would actually work. I always thought it would be a funny little thing where there might always be an excuse why the chat wasn't working. because I don't think those things ever really work at the end of the day. Like they're kind of there for entertainment value more than anything, because they're pretty frustrating. And still in keeping in line with the idea of being responsive to certain environmental influences, this was a kind of a response as if you went to the website at 3 a.m., you know, maybe you just get a video of the KLF song 3 a.m. Eternal popped up on there. So always just trying to have a little bit of fun with things, but responding to sort of certain environmental conditions or time. Mobile, and then even though they, you know, there was never any intention to do any business cards, I thought it was a nice way to at least demonstrate and sell in sort of the idea of how that kind of the dynamic system could work across the whole identity. And then even through to sort of posters promoting specific events. Yeah, and then that's the sort of, this wasn't in the first concept presentation, but this is kind of where we got to when it was signed off. Now, conscious of time, so I'm going to blow past these ones. Sorry, clients. And kind of jump ahead to these miscellaneous things that I'll kind of go through really quick. These aren't case studies. These are just a couple things that, again, are kind of indicative of the practice. Like a lot, we kind of get a lot of opportunity to do these posters, submissions for various things. Usually it comes from Instagram or whatever, where someone gets in touch, says, hey, can you do a poster for this cause or this charity or this, you know, thing. This is one I did a couple months ago for initiative called Make Act Now. Essentially, it's a book featuring 100 posters, all about, you know, climate change and kind of urging people to change their ways. This is another one, again, was just something from Instagram, where a Type Foundry, which I believe they're based in Montreal, approached me to do takeovers on their account. So I had to do seven graphics over 7 days using their typefaces. So I just repurposed a lot of my own existing work, changed the fonts, you know, to their typefaces. And then there was this kind of taking the piss out of this sort of plastic fetishism that sort of exists on Instagram. Maybe you've never seen it, but it, you know, it's all over. Designers are always like putting things in plastic to make them look cool. So there's a bit of a piss take on the ridiculousness, and frankly, to kind of say, just stop doing it, because, you know, if we're trying to talk about living more environmentally conscious, then, you know, fetishizing plastic shouldn't be a part of that. Music is such a huge part of my life. I don't make it, but I'm always sort of recording mixes, and then making the covers for mixes are always, you know, always a lot of fun. So just pulled in a few different ones here. So generally about like once a month or once every 2 months, I'll sort of make a mix. Everything is digital now, so I can do it directly on my laptop. I can do it while I'm working on some tedious work in the background. So it's kind of great. This is an exhibition cover proposal for an amazing exhibition that took place last year by a street artist named Roan, where he took over this entire building. It had been derelict for about 15, 20 years. And you know, essentially because they couldn't get the building permits were taking ages. So the hospitality operator opened it up and said, hey, do you want to do something with the space? So Rowan kind of went in and did his thing with the help of this interior designer, Carly Spooner. And essentially they've kind of created like all these images. It's meant to be like, oh, this is how the space was just left, you know, 50 years ago or whatever. But they've sourced all these, you know, bits of furniture, all the plants, all of this has been composed. Even the dust was blown in there by a dust machine. It absolutely mind-blowing exhibition, and that's probably my favorite image there. That room's actually been filled up with water. And yeah, good old Trent Reznor. But I think this line in that song "Hurt" was sort of what inspired the name of the exhibition. This is some album artwork that I did for a band called NYCK. sort of what came out next year. This is sort of something that's going to be launched August 1st, that I kind of finished a couple months ago, but the launch of it's been postponed due to COVID, but it's the relaunch or redesign of a paper here in Australia called the Saturday Paper, which only comes out once a week, as the name suggests, on Saturday. We have a detail shot there. A great project, amazing a project. A very, very quick look at something that I'm hoping, I think is going to be, the 2020 project like Flax Studio for another architect. High hopes there. A very small digital identity for a friend of mine who's a contemporary dancer. But, it's going to be a pretty cool little website, not a hugely complicated, but I think it's going to be quite nice. Hopefully live in the next month. And then this is another sort of website that should be live in the next month for an animation and motion graphics studio here in Melbourne. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time.